Hey team, hope you're well. Today I'm going to be making a video explaining how properties are actually valued in New Zealand. I think if I was going to watch any video on this channel, it would probably be this one. I think this is probably the most misunderstood thing in property in New Zealand, honestly. It is such a critical thing if you're going to have property or look to build a portfolio in New Zealand, arguably right now, from my opinion, from being in the industry for 2 years at least. It's such a crucial thing. So I'm going to talk through all the things to consider, at least I've seen from my point of view, being a mortgage broker working with all the banks and things to think about, okay? So the first way I guess properties are valued in New Zealand that you need to understand is, and you're probably exposed to, is like the online site. So I am actually going to look up a property right now. We're going to go on Trade Me and find a property, but you'll see on Homes, One Roof, realestate.co.nz, like all these online sites, there's a valuation for most properties. If there's just like a single dwelling property in an urban area of New Zealand, almost always there's some sort of online valuation for those properties. So we'll look at a specific property that I'll just come across randomly in a second, and go through what it actually is for that and how they compare with these. This valuation metric, like I mentioned, for Homes, One Roof, and realestate.co.nz, they are almost useless in the event that you're going to do something for like a bank valuation. The pretty much only time they have significance is if maybe a first home buyer or someone that maybe isn't necessarily that involved in the property industry is looking at the online valuation and they're thinking, oh, I might be getting a good deal here. Pretty much the only thing that has significance is that exclusively. If you're looking at valuations for online sites, they basically don't mean anything else other than that. The next one is council valuation. So each property in New Zealand will probably have a council valuation on it. They're normally done every single 3 years by that respective council that's doing the valuation. The people that do the valuations, from my understanding at least anyway, is they're not really looking at much data. It's pretty random how they come up with the conclusion. They're probably looking at some comparables and floor size and other metrics. It doesn't have that much significance, but it does tend to have a correlation with, depending on how your property is being valued from the council valuation, will determine how much rates you have to pay per year, right? So for example, I don't know what the ratio is, but I think the property value or the council valuation for my property right now is $450,000, and I'm paying $2,000 per year in rates on this property currently, right? So it may mean like if a property is worth $900,000 in Auckland, because my property is in Auckland, maybe the rates are $3,000 for this property. If a property is worth 1.5 million, maybe you can expect the rates to be around $4,000. It's not always like this, but this is kind of a general rule of thumb. The more expensive a property is within the same region, the more rates are payable generally. So that's the significance that it really has. It doesn't really have much significance in terms of if a bank application is being done or if you're looking to sell a property. Sometimes new buyers will look at the CV compared to what they're paying for. It kind of has some substance, I guess, similar to like the online valuation on Homes, One Roof, and .co.nz. But in terms of the bank reviewing the council valuation, almost never. That, like, in some occasions there can be some influence, in some occasions, which we'll talk about with the bank valuations. Sometimes some properties don't have bank valuations, and in the event that there is a big spread in a client's position between what their property is worth relative to their debt, if the CV is there, a bank may lend on the CV if there is no bank valuation, and if a registered valuation isn't required. So anyway, that's sort of a bit of a breakdown on the council valuation. Again, we'll look at an example soon. I'll try to find a random property and we'll go through all of this together and maybe evaluate as well if it's like a good buy or buying on a discount, or if it's not at all. Now, the next valuation metric is the bank valuations that banks use. Now, currently at the time of recording, there's two bank valuation sites that are basically used by banks. One is called CoreLogic. So some banks will use the site, and another one is called Valocity. Okay, so I won't disclose actually what each bank uses, but ultimately, majority of main banks in New Zealand right now are using these valuation metrics to determine, how a property is valued, right? So, in the event that I say submit an application to a bank, I might say, look, my client's property is worth $500,000. Here is the valuation on Valocity. My client's lending is maybe $350,000. I might try see if I can get a better solution, because the LVR is at a level where the bank would be comfortable with this split between what the property is worth relative to the debt, right? So they will use that valuation to determine if this is okay. Maybe on homes and one roof it's 550, but the bank will say no. We can see on Velocity or CoreLogic, whatever they use, it's 500. We will lend up to that value as of right now. These valuations on these two sites, they change every week. I find on Monday, I think they kind of update their pricing, and it normally ranges between 5 to 10 grand increments. So, some weeks it can actually be a lot more, can be a lot more drastic. Like maybe if there's some comparable sales in the area, or maybe if there's a live listing and the price displayed on the listing changes. I've noticed that, especially on CoreLogic, it can change quite significantly. It might drop like up to like 30 grand. But what you just need to understand is, if right now, this is how banks value properties. If there's a bank valuation, they will take that online valuation. The only time they may not is if you have just recently purchased a property. They will most likely always take the lower of the two between the purchase price and the bank slash registered valuation. So for example, I recently bought a property for 225 in the central North Island, and the bank valuation on Velocity is actually $345,000. So a bank won't let me lend up to $345,000 till at least 6 months is the general policy that is used, because they always want to take the lower of the two, right? Like if you think of the bank's point of view, I'll put my existing position in here, and I probably have made a video about this actually, that maybe you might have seen before, but this is my position currently at the time of recording. My lending is about $190,000 against what I bought it for, a 225. Now, I believe I got a really, really good price and discount on this property, right? It can be seen based on the bank valuation, and this was a reason actually why I made the decision to buy this property. But the bank could be quite exposed in the event that, say, I can lend up to $345,000, as that's the bank valuation. Maybe I can lend up to 70% of the value of that because it's going to be an investment property for me. So my max lending could be 2 for 1 if I can prove I can actually service the debt up to this amount with my existing position. But this is why they take the lower of the two generally for the first 6 months, is because I actually could have my lending higher than what I actually bought the property for. So in the event that I'm not cooperative with repaying this, then that could leave the future lender very exposed if they lend on the bank valuation. Sometimes, like maybe there is a way of getting it within 6 months, maybe depending on the scenario and case by case. It's pretty rare that you can buy a property, in my experience, on as much a discount as I have here relative to the bank valuation. But this is just things to think about, because it has so much significance in regards to what you can do moving forward. A lot of people maybe don't understand this, but if you want to know what your bank valuation is for a property that you personally own, or if you're actually looking at buying a property, it's something I can look at for you, and I look at all the time for my clients, whether they're it's their own properties or a property they want to buy. Cool. The next thing is a registered valuation. So this one is like what's the word? Just the one that is the most significant of valuations. However, this is completed by a person that is regulated in the space to give valuations on properties. So to order one in New Zealand right now, you can probably expect to pay $900 to have a registered valuation actually completed on a property, and that's something that the bank will utilize and consider over all of these, right? So in some scenarios, maybe the bank valuation is a little bit lower, and some people might dispute the fact that their property is actually worth what it says on the bank valuation. Maybe they've done quite extensive renovations. Maybe the bank valuation is $800K, and I might have a client that say, look, I've done this much work in this amount of time. I suspect it's worth $900,000, and if the property is valued at $900K, that might actually enable my client to do actually what they want. So the only con is that obviously you've got to pay around $900 to have one completed, and it's not a guarantee that it will come back at the level you want it to. But it has the most significance, right, compared to all of these, because the bank will lend on this. It does come with the same constraint of, like, they will always lend on the lower of the two within the first 6 months generally after a purchase. Maybe a non-bank lender might be a little bit more flexible potentially, but most main banks will say, look, 6 months is what we're going to need in this regard. But these are ultimately how properties are valued. So I'm going to actually find an example and show you how all of this works now, so you can actually see what it looks like. All right, team, I'm on Trade Me Now. I'm just going to search on property and try find the first property I think that will have like valuation metrics on all of them. And I think this might be the one we use, which is quite good because there's also a price by negotiation. So we don't necessarily know what they're expecting to sell for necessarily. So if we scroll down, we can see the council valuation. So that's listed here, $390,000. And we can see some other data on TradeMe. I'm assuming if you've got this far into the video, you probably have seen TradeMe before. This is the homes estimate for the property. So we're looking at about a median of 415,000, give or take. Now you can see here with the council valuation, like I said, every 3 years there's a council valuation done. So because we're at the peak of the market around 2021 to 2022, it's a little bit higher and inflated compared to what it is now. You'll find that generally in most areas of New Zealand, maybe excluding Queenstown, most likely. But yeah, and it most recently sold for $90,000 in 2004, this property. Now, there are two other sites. Like I said, there's One Roof and there's Home. So I'm going to copy this address, 6 Young Grove, Stokes Valley. Let's have a look on One Roof. Okay, 6 Young Grove. So yeah, on homes, I think it was 410,000. It's a little bit lower on here. The other site's realestate.co.nz. So let's have a look. There's probably some other sites too, but these are probably the primary ones where most people in New Zealand are looking for real estate listings. So on here, we've got $396,000. So we can see with the CV and all of these comparables, it's sort of ranging in like the high threes to very, very low fours is sort of how they're forecasting what the property value is. Now, the next one is the bank valuation. So I'm going to go to them now. Cool. So for CoreLogic, the bank valuation is currently 375,000. So that's a little bit lower than the others. So some lenders will end up to that value basically as of right now without needing a registered valuation. And then Velocity has the valuation at 380,000. So it's pretty consistent across the board, but we know ultimately, Velocity and CoreLogic, they're going to lend up to those values, which has the most significance. So I'll go back to Excel and then we can go through some other things to consider. So knowing the numbers, I'll take the lower of the two between the bank valuations. Now, in the scenario, say you buy this home, maybe you're a first-time buyer. If you're buying it for say 375, exactly what it's worth, and you're putting in a 10% deposit of the purchase price, you're looking at a loan of this. Now, keep in mind, in the event, say you want to get off a low equity margin because you might have a higher interest rate if you have less than the 20% deposit, you're going to need to prove that you have 80% LVR or 20% equity in your property, right? So if the valuation is 375, this is your debt level. The bank's going to say, okay, if we're going to give you, the best rates, best cash back, all the best offering, we don't want to have your debt exposure above 300K if your valuation is sitting here. And you probably can now understand from looking at all that data, there's probably nothing to suggest that a registered valuation would bring it higher based on all of this. So the idea here is if you're wanting to get the best deal and solution and maybe have no higher interest rate from having less than a 20% deposit, is you looking to try buy it on a discount. Maybe you're needing to buy at say $330,000. Maybe the people that are selling this property really need to sell. They bought it for 90 grand in 2004, so maybe they're not too particular with the price that they get compared to maybe other people on the market that have maybe recently bought and need to sell and have had a more urgent requirement. It probably depends, and that's something you can ask the agent about in the scenario. But to make this work and have, say, the best rates, this is probably the requirement of where you need to buy at based on where the bank valuations are, if that's an outcome you want, So say in the scenario you buy for 330,000, maybe you've got 35 grand for a deposit. That would mean your total debt is actually 295,000. So now all of a sudden you might be able to justify to a new lender maybe after 6 months and say, look, the bank valuation is sitting at this level, my debt exposure is here. Can you please give me a solution where you can pay out my current lender and give me a better solution at this level? Or maybe you can say the same to your existing bank. But this is just a quick scenario, an example of like how bank valuations and valuation have importance. They're not going to look at the online valuation or the council valuations from the bank's point of view. In this scenario, they're going to look at this. So there's probably other scenarios too. where like these have significance more so than the scenario I'm presenting is like a first home buyer. Maybe if you're looking at, moving banks and looking for a better solution, or maybe if you're looking to do more complex things like desecuring a property or removing your exposure, or, split banking. So you have, collateral at multiple different banks rather than being cross collateralized with the same bank. There's a variety of things where like this can have super large significance. Sometimes you'll also find that CoreLogic might be a little bit higher than Valocity, and Valocity might be a little bit higher in CoreLogic in some regards to a property you're looking at, and each bank uses a different tool, so all of these things add up, and that's why it's actually really important to maybe have an analysis with a broker and someone that has the insight for these valuations to know how the bank is going to actually look at them before an application is even submitted. Another thing too with registered valuations, something to think about is I can say from my experience, normally for like a scenario that we looked at for that property in Stokes Valley, is it will probably be pretty similar to these, especially if there isn't a very big spread. But sometimes a registered valuation can be done based on the rental income it's achieving relative to other properties. So that's another thing. Like I know for a property that I recently purchased and a property that I was trying to arrange and get a good solution for buying it under value and preparing it for an investor, I asked the registered valuer that was doing both of those, two occasions I was just talking about, will they value it based on the rental income it's getting, because it was a multi-income property. Multi-income properties don't generally have bank valuations on them because they're normally valued differently compared to just single dwelling properties, because of the rental income it's getting. So they're valued actually a little bit differently. But anyway, maybe I'm going a bit on a ramble there, guys. I just kind of wanted to highlight again the valuation things you need to consider. It can be, quite a subjective thing, properties and valuations, but this is like quite a key thing, and it's important to understand when you're making a decision if you're going to buy a property or try to get a better solution for your existing lending, because maybe another bank might give you a better solution based on what's going here on how the banks are valuing your properties. So hopefully you guys found that helpful. If you do want to reach out to me and have me analyze something for you, happy to do that, guys. So leave your details. I'll see if I can help. I'll leave some videos on the screen too if you want to watch more of my stuff. And yeah, that could be helpful. Cheers, guys.